All right, ready for another deep dive? Today we're tackling Noli Tangere, but with a twist.
A twister.
You bet. We're not focusing on Ibarra or Maria Clara this time.
Oh, interesting. Who are we looking at then?
We're going deep on the Alferez.
The Alferez. Now that's a character who gets under your skin.
Definitely not a typical villain. Rizal gave us something way more complex there.
Absolutely. So much more interesting than a simple bad guy.
Okay, for anyone new here, quick recap. The Alferez is a Spanish military officer stationed in the Philippines during the 19th century. Right in the heart of all that tension, Rizal portrays so well in Noli.
Yeah, he's right there, entangled in the power dynamics of colonial rule.
But he's not just a symbol, right? He's got his own desires, his own baggage.
Definitely not a cardboard cutout. He's got his own conflicts and desires, and those impact the people around him. Big time.
Like that whole feud with Padre Damaso.
Man, that's explosive.
But it goes beyond just them clashing, right? It feels like it says something bigger about the whole situation.
Oh, for sure. You can see it as a microcosm of the church and state's power struggle back then. Secular authority versus religious power.
Head to head with the Alferez in one corner.
Exactly. Then things get even more complicated when you bring in his interest in Maria Clara.
Right. What's going on there? Is he actually drawn to her, or is it more about conquest?
That's the million-dollar question, and it forces us to think about colonialism's effects on relationships.
Okay, so hold on. We've got this guy, the Alferez.
Yep.
He represents the oppressive military, but he's got these inner struggles too. Plus, he's dealing with powerful figures like Padre Damaso, and maybe has less than honorable intentions towards Maria Clara.
Lots going on. And the question becomes, is he just a product of this system he's part of? Or can he actually shape his own destiny?
Good point, because what he does affects so many others, especially Don Rafael Ibarra.
Right. The conspiracy that takes Ibarra down involves the friars and, to some extent, the Alferez himself.
So where does this leave our Alferez? Enforcing colonial rule, fighting with religious figures, caught up in personal drama. It feels like things are about to explode.
It's all building to something, that's for sure. And speaking of things exploding, what happens to him in the end? Does he face any consequences for his actions?
Or does he just kind of slip through the cracks?
Well, Rizal doesn't shy away from themes of justice and retribution in Noli. But before we give away the ending, let's take a step back and see how this seemingly minor character actually embodies some of the novel's most powerful themes. You know, he might not be front and center like Ibarra, but the Alferez is like this perfect lens to examine the ugly side of Spanish colonialism, the hypocrisy, the brutality.
And he's not just thinking about it. He's actually out there enforcing these policies every day.
Exactly. It's in every interaction with the Filipinos he encounters. You can just feel it.
What do you mean?
This sense of entitlement. Like he's superior just because he's wearing that uniform.
Ah, yeah, I see that. Like he expects everyone to bow down just because of his position.
Right. And it goes beyond official duties, too. Think about how he acts toward women, especially Maria Clara.
Okay, yeah. Let's dig into that a bit more. We talked about the colonial gaze earlier. How does it actually play out with the Alferez and Maria Clara?
Well, think about it. Maria Clara is presented as like the ideal Filipina, beautiful, virtuous. And the Alferez, coming from that colonial mindset, he sees her as a prize, something to be conquered.
So it's not really about attraction then. It's about power.
Exactly. Control dominance. That whole dynamic says so much about how colonialism messed up ideas about race and gender and power.
Yeah. It's not just about politics. It's about controlling who is seen as desirable, who deserves respect.
You got it. That's disturbing for sure, but it also makes the Alferez a much more interesting character than just some simple villain.
True. He feels more real, more human.
Definitely a product of his time, but also making his own choices. And those choices have consequences. Which brings us to his role in Don Rafael Ibarra's downfall.
Yeah, so tragic. Like he was a pawn in the friars' game.
He was both a pawn and someone actively participating in the injustice. It's what makes it all so complicated.
So does he have any control at all? Or is he just swept along by the tide of history?
Big question, right? And I think Rizal purposely leaves that open. He wants us to think about it, wrestle with the complexities of colonialism and how it affects everyone.
So we shouldn't just label the Alferez as the bad guy.
Right. It's more about understanding what made him who he was, the pressures, the choices he made.
And by looking at his story, we can understand Noli on a deeper level.
Exactly. All those big themes. Abuse of power, the fight for justice, how people resist oppression.
Man, we covered a lot. The Alferez and the colonial hierarchy, his beef with the friars, his relationship with Maria Clara, his part in Don Rafael's downfall. But I think we're finally ready for the big question. What happens to this guy in the end?
Well, let's just say Rizal loved irony. And the way that Alferez's story ends is a perfect example. But before we reveal everything, I want to ask you and everyone listening, do you think he deserves a tragic ending? Or is there any chance of redemption for someone so caught up in a corrupt system?
Ah, that's a tough one.
Yeah.
I mean, on one hand, he's done terrible things. He seems to represent everything wrong with the colonial regime.
But you could also say he's shown some vulnerability, too. Maybe even some conflict about his role in all this.
That's true. And those glimpses of humanity make his character so interesting. It's what makes the ending so powerful. I'm ready to hear it. What happens?
You sure?
Tell me. Absolutely. Hit me with it. What's his fate?
Okay, so brace yourself. In a twist that only Rizal could pull off, the Alferez dies a pretty ridiculous death.
Really? How? Tell me.
He's killed by a stray carabao.
A what?
A carabao!
What?
During a fiesta.
You're kidding me, right? A carabao? That's how it goes out.
I know, right? It seems so out of left field, even funny. But think about it for a second.
And what's called?
There's this deep irony in how Rizal chose to end his story.
Okay. Yeah, I kind of see it. It's like he's making fun of the whole Spanish authority thing.
Exactly. This guy, the Alferez, he's supposed to represent the power of the Spanish Empire strutting around with his sword and uniform, and then bam, he's taken out by a simple farm animal.
Wow. That's a serious reality check. Talk about bringing him down a peg.
Right. And it makes you think about power in general,
Yeah.
especially colonial power.
What do you mean?
It's like it's all built on this shaky foundation. It can be toppled by the most random, unexpected things.
Like a runaway carabao?
Exactly. So, yeah, the Alferez's death is ironic, it's symbolic, but does it actually bring justice?
Good question.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's kind of satisfying in a karmic way, but does it really fix the problems he represents?
It's like putting a Band-Aid on a broken leg. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of what Rizal is trying to say. He's not giving us simple solutions or revenge stories.
He's making us face the messy reality of colonialism and its lasting effects.
So even though the Alferez is gone, those systems of oppression are still there.
Yeah, they live on. And that's why Noli Me Tangere still feels so relevant. It reminds us that the fight for justice isn't over. Taking down a few bad guys isn't enough.
Wow. We started talking about the Alferez, this seemingly small-time player, and we ended up exploring some of the biggest themes in Noli Me Tangere.
That's the magic of literature, right? We can step into these worlds and, through characters like the Alferez, grapple with huge questions. Power, justice, what it means to be human.
It's been a wild ride for sure.
And I think the Alferez, flaws and all, was the perfect companion for this journey. He made us question things, confront uncomfortable truths, and really engage with history.
He might not be a hero, but he's definitely a character we can learn from.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up, one final thought for our listeners. Never underestimate the little guys in a story. They often hold the keys to unlocking deeper meanings, both in the stories themselves and in the world around us.
That's great advice. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into Noli Me Tangere.
My pleasure. And to everyone listening, keep those minds curious and those books open.